positive impact on society. Again, I want to say in the developed world you have a spectrum. The United States being at the highest end of the trusting, at the lowest end would be France, Germany, and the UK. The most trusted industries in the developed world would be tech and healthcare and biotech. Trust and own CEO, as you see, a market difference between 60% and 43%. So, again, the trust divide. Government is least trusted institution everywhere except for Asia, driven up by China. Also, note that business is the #1 trusted institution in both Asia and in Latin America. Note that NGOs are the top institution in trust in Europe and in North America. Religion, this is the first time we've included religion in our survey. We put as a question mark, is this an untapped resource and an alliance partner for business? Business has started to figure out how to make partnerships with NGOs. In fact, the Reverend and I were talking before about in Europe perhaps it's hard to separate religion and NGOs because they have origins often in organized religion. But I will tell you in the United States the second most trusted institution is religion. You ignore religion at your peril in dealing in the United States. The developing world is more trusting of business. If you look at this chart, it tells you the whole story because the top 4 countries, Mexico, India, China, Brazil, have very high numbers. At the bottom, France, Germany, UK, Italy. So let me try and give you, instead of just a snapshot, let's look at this over a period of time. We have 7 years of data, so let's look at the data series. What you see in the United States, and you'll each have these charts in your packs on the way out, what's happened to business is it had a low point 2002, and it's come up smartly, about 10 points, to about 53% today. NGOs have actually passed business. NGOs started at the lowest level in the United States around 27, up now to 57%. That's non-governmental organizations. Government, which had a high point after 9/11, which you might expect, had another high point in 2004 and has come off substantially. So the gap between trust in business and trust in government has never been wider in the United States. In the largest 3 economies in Europe, what you see is that NGOs continue to be the most trusted institution, as they have been since we began this survey. Government has come off substantially. Also, business has flatlined, more or less. So business has not had the bounce that it's had in the United States. We have another hypothesis for you today that we'd like you to consider, which is that there are now 2 axes of communications. Let me try and describe these. The traditional way that business is communicated has been on the vertical axis. If you think about it, companies have spoken to the elites, which might be regulators, financial analysts, elite media, with great detail and trying to explain, but to the mass has been simplistic, using advertising, talking in a one-way street. That's a good way to proceed. It's no longer sufficient, however. We believe that our data shows conclusively that you now must have a horizontal conversation, and that on the horizontal axis you cannot control the message. In fact, you are much better briefing the so-called messengers and letting them go out and having spontaneous discussions. So those would be passionate consumers, empowered employees in particular. These are people who are going to have discussions in any case. You may as well try to help them have informed conversation. Important that you note that in the developed countries this year we saw a substantial trust decline in traditional media. Probably no great surprise. It's part of this horizontal axis that's developed. People are articulating between the horizontal and the vertical. The sweet spot, therefore, is between. It's Ian in the horizontal, and it's the FT in the vertical, for example. However, it is important to understand the power still of the traditional media. The most credible source continues to be either articles in business magazines, or now stock and industry analyst reports. That is a major change from 4 years ago. Analyst reports have come substantially up, in part because of reforms taken in the wake of the investigations in the early part of this decade. Notice, however, also the importance of conversations with friends and peers. I want to now get to building trust through CSR. We believe that we actually asked, what are your top 2 issues that you believe business ought to be responsible for? You see generally that in the less developed countries, it's poverty. In the more developed countries, it's either human rights or global warming. Again, you start to see this divide across developed versus developing markets. Interestingly, basic consensus around the point that corporations have a positive impact on society. And this is a marker for business to say there's expectation of you, and also there's belief in you. In a time when trust in government has diminished, the kind of last men standing are business and civil society. Trust for business, then, is both rational and emotional. It's rational based on the obvious quality of your products. Are you attentive to service? But the emotional aspect is, are you doing good employee relations and are you socially responsible? You can create a virtuous circle if you are dealing with the rational and the emotional. Trust is built, therefore, on 2 pillars. The CSR part of the house and the quality part of the house. It's not so much built on financial performance, brand recognition, or CEO visibility. And I want to underline this CEO visibility thing. CEO tenure today is only 4 years. If you build your reputation on the superstar Jack Welch, you are making a terrible mistake. The risk is too high, and the person's going to go. Home Depot is the most recent example of that kind of thinking. Bob Nardelli is out today, in part at least, because he embraced the imperial CEO model of his mentor, Jack Welch, and it led him to a very bad end. So, we've gone through these trust builders, but you note that in basics, quality products, social responsible activities. Ethical behavior is a top priority for business in the developed world, and understand that the mandate is not just to do it in those markets, meaning those developed markets, but to do it everywhere. You cannot any longer say, oh, well, we can afford to be different in China or some other place. It doesn't work that way. Social responsibility, the new green, is treatment of employees. Look at this slide. This really surprised us. Yes, it's very important to have products meeting environmental standards, but the new green is fair treatment of employees. It's smart also because they're the ones participating in the horizontal axis of communications. To further this point, understand that listening to employees builds trust. You have to figure out mechanisms for hearing and listening and changing your behavior if necessary. So, we actually have now a hypothesis that we should discuss in the question and answer period, which is that, in fact, you can activate trust. There are trust holders. We've actually tried to create a model akin to a Boston Consulting Group kind of model. You got to emulate the smart guys. On the vertical axis, you have talkers and engagers, and the bottom of it would be the listeners and watchers, and then you have the passive and actives. And we have 4 categories of people: the public activist, the social networker, the solo actor, and then the couch potato uninvolved. So basically, these people have distinct personalities. Activists engage in public action in an outspoken way. Social networkers are sharers and seekers and trying to understand and value public opinion. And then solo actors, well, they're going to just act personally. And then the uninvolved, you know who those are. What we find is that the group that public relations can most affect is the social connector.